Good evening. Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast number 2 today. I kind of like the first podcast of the day because it was kind of a time capsule of where the Illini fan base was feeling a little concerned, a little agitated, a little, just bothered by some quietness. But Ben Humrichous comes in and saves the day and gets everybody's spirits up a little bit. And Mike LaTulip, kind enough to join me, Jeremy Werner, to talk about Ben Humrichous, Evansville transfer forward, committing to Illinois, averaged 15 points, 5 rebounds, shot 41% from 3 last season. Mike, I'm a fan of him, but I know you're a fan of him as well. What is Illinois getting in Ben Humrichous?
Well, first things first, we had a little bit of time off in between commitments. The Jake Davis commitment feels like 2 years ago. But no, man, with Ben, it's a really good ad. I think the size and the shooting is well documented. But I think offensively, and when you look at the full offensive package for him, it's the handle and the ability to handle that I think unlocks a lot of things for him. You could see watching him at Evansville, just the escapability when it came to late clock or having to get a shot off. When you have that size, like we talked about, and when you have the shooting, that's usually great and it limits guys to catch and shoot. But when you can handle it too, you're able to get shots off with the dexterity that he has. And I thought that was something that really popped when watching his film. But I think this ties a lot of things together for them, this type of ad, and what you can do from a lineup standpoint, from a personnel standpoint. I don't always love giving a numerical value to a player and saying, hey, he's going to play the 3, he's going to play the 4, he's going to play the 5. This is a wing, right, that I think at times can play the 5. If you have a 5-man defender, what we call an X5, that plays solely drop, this is a guy that you can put in at the 5 and have him pick and pop. And if they want to put that 5-man on another player, now you put them in trouble because you have guys that can drive. And so, I think it's impressive, and it's a really good ad and one that they needed for sure.
I just love this offensive skill set, Mike, that he brings. He's got a little bit more athleticism to him than, watching him a little bit more, but it's just rare to find a guy with this kind of size and this kind of shooting ability. And you wonder what he can do with the talent he'll have around him. Like, so fitting with a Kylan Boswell and a Trey White, Kerry Booth, potentially Merez Johnson. What do you think can be unlocked just having that kind of teammates around him? Because he was kind of the guy even at Evansville, right? And at the NAIA level, he kind of had to run a lot of their stuff.
Yeah, well, I think you asked the question of, the guys around him, what it can unlock for Ben. I think it's you can look at it the other way. Yeah. I think what he unlocks for them, because when you have a guy that can shoot the ball, I think the first thing that everyone thinks of is, hey, he's a floor spacer. But when you watch these highlights and when you watch him, it is a quick release. And quick releases put defenses, create even more paranoia because you have to be that much closer. You have to be there on the catch. It's not just locating them where they're at. Like, that changes the geometry of the floor a little bit. So if I think of a Trey White, if I think of Kylan Boswell, if they want to go to booty ball actions with, if they do decide to add another wing player that can play that way, or if Trey does it, or if Kylan can do it, that creates more spacing for all those guys. So, I think that, you see the passing ability too. He's a complete player. And he's not the most athletic guy in terms of burst off the bounce, but I think it actually plays in his favor a bit because it just inherently makes him play with pace. Mm-hmm. And there were times last year, a number of times, like he came off of a lot of ball screens last year. And whether or not that happens with Illinois remains to be seen. But when you have a 6'9" guy that can handle it, and if he waits on a screen, those 6'9" guys are a little bit harder to square up. And that's why he had so much success in those particular scenarios. So you mentioned it. Evansville put him in a ton of different spots. I think booty ball is an option with Illinois. We'll see if, like, in certain situations he does come off ball screens. But bottom line, at a floor and at a minimum, this is a pretty incredible floor spacer.
Yeah, so, like, making the transition again up a level for a second straight year, goes from NAIA to the Missouri Valley, shows he can compete at that level. What are his adjustments, if at all, to the Big Ten level?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I mentioned the ball screens and him coming off of ball screens. the handle when he got guys into him and when he had to maneuver the ball screen, it wasn't necessarily the tightest. I think where you see it tight for him is more so when he gets in isolation and when he can really kind of put you on his side and use his size and then be able to absorb any type of blow that he gets. That's where you see the handle. And so him playing in close quarters and maneuvering, like I don't see that being a particular strength for him. But certainly if he can be in a situation where he can kind of put guys in jail like he does there, and can finish at a high level around the rim and then stay efficient. Like the big thing for me watching him and even looking at his stats throughout the season is he played 24 games. And it wasn't a situation where it was like, hey, played 24 games, was out for the first 10, played the final 24. Like he, played the first 10, was out 4, came back, was out another 2. I think he missed the game before the conference tournament, then came back for the conference tournament. Then they played in the postseason, I believe. And I think he missed those games as well. So through all of that, for him to still be a 41% 3-point shooter where you're kind of in and out and not necessarily in a game-to-game rhythm, I thought was pretty good to see.
Defensively, rebounding, what does he had in those realms, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think defensively it's going to be interesting, right? We talked about this a little bit with Domask, but what can be kind of interesting about the high major level or the mid-major to high major transition, we've talked about this before. For whatever reason, at the mid-major level, a lot of smaller guards and a lot of bigs. High major level, a lot more wings. So that maybe gives him an opportunity to, I don't want to say hide at certain points defensively, but he's smart enough to where he can play angles. It's just more so, one-on-one in space. And then rebounding, I think, again, not like a crazy explosive athlete, but he does use his leverage really well and is able to kind of tip balls around and keep balls alive. And, he wasn't particularly bad on the offensive glass this year. And part of that, I think, was the size in the Missouri Valley where he could kind of overpower some guys. So he's going to have to be crafty with how he does that. And then just like anyone, defensive rebounding, you're needed on that end, man. All these guys are. So I think Kylan Boswell is another guy that can take a step forward in that department. So the defense, the rebounding, I think obviously the offense is more of a strength in those two areas, but just like Marcus last year, you can always be surprised.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, this had to be a heck of a sell. Like Marcus Domask had to be a heck of a sell to Ben Humrichous. They're a little bit different players, obviously. And I've seen some people in the chat say booty ball, all of that. Like I think Humrichous can do some of that, but he's a better shooter than Marcus, that's for sure. But that had to be quite a sell to him to see a guy make that leap from the Missouri Valley. And now we're talking about Marcus potentially. Is he going to be in the G League camp, for the NBA showcase coming up? I think he's gonna have a great chance of doing that. And whether he makes the NBA or not, like all of a sudden he's on radars because of that, what he did at Illinois.
Yeah. I mean, I think one guy that in the Marcus Sell is, I think I saw him wearing the number 3 jersey in the edit, right? Or in his commitment post. So the Marcus Sell is, it's funny watching Marcus do what he did. And you see a lot of people in the portal and teams in general, like really going after mid-majors hard and paying a lot for mid-major players when really like those guys give themselves the best chance to be successful when they buy in, right? When they're high character, good character guys. And by all accounts, I talked to some Missouri Valley coaches as well. Like that is what they're getting in Humrichous too. And that just gives you a chance, man. It gives you a chance to be successful in this year that you have at Illinois. So yeah, different players for sure. I think Marcus is a little bit. I mean, Ben's really skilled. I think Marcus is probably a little bit more skilled just because he's shorter. He's a little more like compact. He's probably a better ball handler. But definitely, I think for Ben, probably a better shooter, especially catch and shoot and off the bounce as well. So I'll be interested to see kind of how it pans out. I think, there's no question you have a great sell with that guy.
All right, Mike, I love comps, and you said you came prepared with a comp. Not that these are perfect, but it is fun to just kind of think of who could he play like, who can we maybe expect him to kind of act like in the Illinois system. So who you got? Who's your comp for one Ben Humrichous?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on just with Marcus the ability to maybe go to the G League combine. Who knows? Maybe have a cup of coffee in the NBA, similar to what this guy did. Now, this guy did get drafted, but when you look at the player profile, right, and the way they were used in college, like I see a lot of Joe Wieskamp. In a way, and part of that is Joe was used in ball screens as well at Iowa, like had enough of a handle to be able to. Now, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to run this ad nauseum like every time we come down, but it was, hey, things break down. I need to call for one. I can make a play off of it, or I can rise up and shoot. And so that the player profile in that sense, like knocking down threes in transition, spot up guy, straight line drive, being able to explode. And we saw a couple of those highlights where he can finish above the rim. Like a lot of that I think makes sense to me. And Ben probably has more size.
I was about to say
Ben does have more size, but Joe is probably a better athlete, both with kind of balance and also with just overall explosiveness, I think. But to me, that's kind of where I landed on the comp, because they were used in unique ways given their size and skill set. So, it's not always apples to apples, but that was one that definitely stuck out to me.
No, but I think that's the level of shooter you're getting. Like that's what
Joe was insane. I mean, like you look at Joe's breakdowns and shooting, and it was like, hey man, unguarded catch and shoot, he was 47% from three, and guarded he was 48. He is almost on another level. But Ben, the quick release, right? The ability to get a shot off, the ability to say whether it's step back or he shot threes off of ball screens, he shot threes off the dribble, like that type of, like I said, player profile is very reminiscent of Wieskamp, in my opinion.
Yeah, like the Wieskamp, Sanfords might be a little slippery, like quicker, right? I would imagine coming around some of those screens and stuff like that. But the other side of Humrichous is he can probably fight through some stuff in the post a little bit more, right? Like finish through at the rim, like that size is going to be playing well here, especially Mike if he's a 3 or a 4 on the court at the times compared to the 5.
You can put him there for sure. I think he'll spend the majority of his time on the wing, right, or playing the 4. Yeah. But like I said, I mean, he's going to have situations where you play him with the 5, and that's really an overarching theme when you look at how they've attacked the portal, and when you look at fits, right, and who you add and who's already on the team and who you want to go after. You always ask the question of like, okay, how's this guy going to fit in with this guy, and what are we going to do with lineups? When you recruit basketball players, you can move guys around. And that gives you, in this day and age, when you're having to reload, you're having to kind of build a team from scratch, you want to give yourself the best opportunity to kind of pull these different levers, because reality is you're going to have guys that come in where you have expectations for. And if said guy doesn't meet those expectations, do you have other guys that you can fill in and absorb some of those minutes? And I think that's what this staff has done, has built this out to this point that way, and has left the door open for other guys, I think, to come in and also make an impact.
I want to talk about what they add next, but it's fascinating just as a exercise right now with 9 scholarship players. I'm trying to think of who gets the most minutes of the guys right now. I would imagine Colin Boswell, Ben Humrichous for me would probably be number 2, Trey White, number 3 at the moment before they add anything else. Then you have Ty Rodgers, Jake Davis, Dre Gibbs-Allhorn, Kerry Booth, Merez Johnson, Jason Jackson. So how, like, top 5 in minutes of that group, who would you kind of say?
Well, I know who the top 2 are right now. And part of that is what we've always talked about, right? Is the list longer of reasons to take you off the floor, or the reason to keep you on the floor? And for Boswell and Humrichous, the list is longer to keep them on the floor. You need someone who can steady the ship. You need a guy like Boswell that can handle it, that can shoot it, that can get out in transition, that can make you pay in that way. And then you need to have a guy in Humrichous that can, no matter what, given, whatever offensive possession, defensive possession, like we have a guy that can space the floor. And that does wonders for us offensively. So those 2, I'd say at a minimum, are definitely guys that are going to absorb a lot of minutes. Trey White, I think you love the versatility as well, and the ways that you can kind of move him around. I'd put him in there. Ty Rodgers, I think, obviously still has a ton of value. We'll see what happens with Dre in terms of the offseason that he has and how much he progresses. But yeah, I mean, I think, and Carey too. I'm confident on 2.
Yes.
Right. And then I think definitely also confident on Trey. And then beyond there, it's like, it's open competition, I think. And then now you're also factoring in probably 2-3 more guys that they're going to add. So it's fascinating because, you look at these transfer portal rankings too, and how quickly, with minutes and who buys in, right? Who had the expectation of 30 minutes that's now playing 18. I think about Justin Harmon, like that dude bought in.
Yep.
And I think they always maybe sold like a microwave off the bench type of role to him, but there were games where he played 5 minutes, right there. And you can't have guys that are an issue. And I look at last year, like you go to the 247 transfer portal rankings from 2023, the top 20 teams in those rankings, 3 of them made the second weekend.
Mm-hmm.
5 of the top 10 didn't make the NCAA tournament. It's not easy. Like we look at this as like fantasy basketball in a sense. It's like, hey, so-and-so, this team got this guy, and this guy went to Indiana, and this guy went here. It's like, cool, that's a piece of it. It's a whole nother thing to put that thing together.
You're right, Mike. Like I talked about it in our earlier pod today. There's risk in getting 10 transfers on a team, right? Like we saw it with Arkansas, and there's plenty of other teams that are involved in that, as you were talking about. But there's risk in that, and that's why making the right fits and finding the right players to do this all. So let's talk about what is next. At least 3 more guys are going to be added to this team, right? Like 13 scholarships, you have 4 available. I would imagine they hold 1. That's just kind of what he's done. Plus, you're not going to have 12 guys be happy. Jason Jackson is going to redshirt, so he knows. But 12 guys are going to be happy, so you leave one of those open. How would you rank the needs, the 3 needs of that? What would be number 1 on your list right now?
Yeah, I think you still need another wing. I think someone that can put pressure on the rim, someone that still packs a scoring punch. Because you look across the board, Humrichous, although 15 minutes a game, transferring up. Kerry Booth, you don't really expect him to be like a real impact scorer, especially this year. Maybe he grows into that, but certainly this upcoming year, I think it's right to kind of temper expectations on that front. I think Trey White is someone that, in my opinion, is probably most suited to be maybe your 3rd leading scorer, 4th if you have a damn good team.
Yeah.
And Boswell, I do think takes a leap. I think he's kind of hovered around that like 9-10 point per game. I can easily see him being a 12-13 point per game guy. And now I think you need to find a guy that puts pressure on the rim, like I said, and that can pack that scoring punch. And it's not just like, hey, get a guy that can be 16, 17 points a game. It's, yes, you have a guy like that, but that guy becomes that if he is the right fit and is used correctly. And I think this staff is thinking that way. So that's 1 for me. 2 is, I think, still a 5-man that has some versatility that you can play in there, so you don't have to rely solely on Humrichous or Merez or Kerry Booth to absorb those minutes. That would be who I would have, and that profile for that guy is someone that can be skilled, that doesn't only play one way, right? You can only play him and drop, or you can only throw the ball in the post to him, and that's the only way they're effective. It's going to have to be a guy that's low maintenance, but is still skilled enough to be able to be incorporated into what they do. So that is kind of, I really think those are the 2 areas of needs. And if they do add a 3rd person, it's like it's a rotational piece. It's a bench piece that you feel like is maybe a good overall culture fit.
Yeah. Maybe another kind of Jake Davis, different kind of flavor of it. Yeah. Maybe multi-year guy, I would imagine for that kind of role. I do want to ask you about Coleman Hawkins. But before I get there, I want to ask you about Kerry Booth, because I love the Humrichous ad for Kerry Booth, because I think there's less pressure on him. There's more time to develop, but there's still a lot of minutes for him available in this rotation in the front court. So what do you think the impact of adding a guy like Humrichous is on a guy like Kerry Booth?
Yeah, they're different styles, right? Now I think Carey's going to be a better catch and shoot guy than what his freshman year stats maybe suggested, but certainly, right? Like you have a guy that's a little bit bigger, right, in terms of like girth with Humrichous compared to Carey. You can play them together. I think there's going to be situations where they can be in the lineup at the same time at the 4 and at the 5, depending on what the matchup calls for on the other end. So he's just a guy I think you got to be really excited about, because we talked a bunch about his upside and what he can bring, and man, when he gets with Fletch, what that's going to look like. So the fact that they were able to get him a few weeks ago, still add these other pieces and have it all still make sense, I think for Carey moving forward is awesome, because it gives him a chance to develop in kind of like an incubated setting, right? Where he's, like I said, he's going to be with Fletch, but the way the minutes are going to be constructed, it's like, hey, you're going to play and you're going to play a good amount, but it's going to still be playing to your strengths and growing within that. We're not trying to put so much on your plate to where you get discouraged, or put so much on your plate where you become an inefficient player. So all that's on the table for Carey. And I think the Humrichous addition only adds to that.
All right, Coleman Hawkins entered the draft. None of us surprised by that. I wasn't surprised, Mike, by him entering the transfer portal just to keep his options open. But what do you make of it? What do you make of him entering the transfer portal?
He's a smart kid.
Very smart.
He's a smart kid. I think I know this has been touched on a bunch, but just checking all your boxes, because you never know what could happen in the NBA draft process. And this NIL world and the world we're living in has turned into more of a business. It's been much more transactional over the last couple of years. And I think certainly what I was around and in the years prior to me in college. So it's a different world now. I've seen people talk about how players, the longer they wait in the portal, the more leverage that they have and they can get bigger payouts. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think players actually lose leverage. And if you're a staff, I think, the way you look at it, and part of the reason, and this is still has to do with Coleman Hawkins, but it's a broader point where it's like these staffs, you either want to get a guy right when they enter the portal, or you want to get a guy at the end, because right when they enter it, the price probably hasn't gone up yet.
Right.
And at the end of the portal, teams have used their cap space, right? Options are a little bit more limited. I think, some people have this thought process of like, hey, you're going to the portal, and if you're the last man standing, someone's just going to throw $1.5 million at you. And maybe that's true. Is it the right fit for you as a player, if you're a professional prospects? Like, that's a whole different conversation. So for Coleman, I'm not surprised that he entered the portal. I think it is, if you want to talk from a business standpoint, and you want to cut out kind of all the romanticizing about, hey, loyalty and this and that. Like, this dude is going to graduate with an Illinois degree. And I think he's earned the right to enter the market, right, and see what's out there. Now, what that split is in terms of whether or not he goes the NBA route or stays at or comes back to Illinois or goes to another school, I don't know. I'm not privy to those conversations with Coleman and his circle and his family, but
I trust him. I trust him that he was telling us the truth. I mean, he always is honest, no matter what. After the Elite Eight, he said, "I've probably played my last game in Illinois uniform."
Yeah,
I think he's probably right, whether it's the NBA or playing somewhere else. And I get it; it'd be really tough for Illini fans to see him play somewhere else. Like, he gave his all, man, for 4 years. And if some blue blood gives him a bunch of money to go play for a year, I think it'd be interesting to see where he'd fit. But if the NBA tells him he's a second-round draft pick, I think he'll stay in the draft, Mike. But will he hear that? I think that's the key here.
Well, in this draft in particular, compared to last year's draft, right, this would be the draft. I think if you're going to go, you got to go. I mean, it's very similar to Reed Sheppard in a way, right? I don't know if Reed Sheppard's a top 10 pick in last year's draft. I don't know if Reed Sheppard's a top 10 pick in next year's draft, even though that's supposed to be somewhat of a weaker draft as well. So you got to capitalize if you have that opportunity. Now, two ways in what they pay, you have like the conversion rate on that. Sometimes it comes out to $500K, sometimes it comes out to $250, right? So what do some of these schools have to offer? In terms of something above that, I don't know. So it's funny. We're still in April and like all the combines haven't happened and guys haven't. I know we have a couple hours. Is it midnight or is it tomorrow? Like what is the deadline on the transfer portal?
They have to submit their names if you're not a grad by tonight, right? So tomorrow, I think it's all done. But then we won't know for 48 hours for sure who's all in because it takes the compliance departments. So we'll still see guys entering, and then the grads have an extra day. And we've learned over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. But by the end of the week, we will know who is in the portal and who is not. Finally.
Well, at least the grads they moved that up, right? Because the grads could go whenever last year, right?
Right.
I guess as long as it was before classes.
Because Cam Spencer was June, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think he was June. There were a number of guys that were super late. That worked out, right, for Cam.
I'm trying to figure out a way we could do this to where it's like the NBA free agency period, where it's all in like 7 days, Mike. That'd be
nuts.
I mean, it's probably not good for our business because like stretching this out probably helps us, but at the same time, yeah, really helps us out. Even though it's crazy with our actual lives, but yeah, like that would be interesting if like you had this like 7-day period where it all actually happened.
Well, there's talk about the window being moved up, the window being moved around, and I think I've just come to learn over the last few years that if it's in the player's best interest, it's going to happen. So whatever that looks like, I mean, they like the players have more leverage than ever, both I think in the courts, as well as just overall with the NCAA.
I want to ask you this, Mike, is somebody who was probably playing college basketball when players had barely any leverage. I remember Jared Utoff being blocked from transferring as a scholarship athlete to Iowa by Bo Ryan. Just see the pendulum swing like all the way to the other way. Like, it is all player leverage. And I think it's great, and I don't know if the genie can be put back in the bottle, but I just wonder at some point if like the Big Ten and SEC break off, like, do they try to get some of that leverage back? And if they do, what that looks like. I don't have any answers for that. I think eventually it's probably, hey, you get a cut of the pie, just like the MLB Players Union. There's a union and all you guys are employed and all of that through the universities. Do they sign them to like long-term contracts? Can you? Because the top prospects, would they even sign multi-year contract? Like all those thoughts are starting to come into my head of what is there a swing back at least a little bit in the other way? Because the players have all the leverage right now, and kudos to them. They didn't for decades.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, just the leverage factor. And like, I know a lot of coaches in the industry where it's like, you got the players and then you got donors and you got collectives, and the coaches are just kind of in the middle. Like, these players kind of have us, and then the donors kind of have us. And it's an interesting dynamic. My question is like, once you start getting into paying them as like employees or multi-year contracts, like the NCAA operates as a nonprofit. Yeah. Right. I mean, like, do they lose their status?
Yeah. No, this is completely
501(c) or whatever it is. Like I think you would kind of have to break off, because the thing that makes the most sense to me is having multi-year contracts that have buyouts. And for a lot of these schools, it gives them a little bit of a safety blanket where it's like, hey, we sign you to a multi-year deal. And if this school wants to pay you $700,000 to come and play for them, cool. You want to take that? Great. But your buyout is X. So we at least are able to recoup something. It doesn't come out of your pocket, right? But if the school wants you that bad, then they have to pay the buyout fee. So like,
I'm starting to wonder about that for like mid-majors. like
right? Like, it's at least it's relief.
It's like loaning a player. Like, it's like in soccer, like loaning a player out for the rest of his contract, and they get paid to help their revenue, and then they can get somebody on the other turn. Like, it's fascinating to think of what that could be, but I think it's going to take the Big Ten SEC breaking off. And I think that will happen within the next decade. I just don't know how it looks and what it.
I mean, I always wonder too, like if that did happen at the mid-major level, would the thought process for mid-major coaches just to be like to essentially flip players?
Yeah.
Like, you are like, basically would be like, we hope you don't finish here, because if you're really good, then maybe we can, if your buyout is X, we can actually make money off of it. So it's that sounds a little bit dark, but it's a fascinating conversation because I think college basketball is unrecognizable from what it was even 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I think it's going to be unrecognizable 3 or 4 years from now. And so whether that's is the conference alignment, conferences breaking off, forming their own thing, how these players are paid, what that looks like contractually, what the agent's role is in this. Because that's the other thing too. I mean, there's these agents. Good on them because it's an incredible market for them right now. It's very minimum work for maximum payout for them, and for a lot of these players, it's like, yeah, sure, I'll have you represent me.
And they're getting a higher percentage in the NBA clients, I'd imagine.
Yeah, they're getting 15, in some cases 20%, where the majority of these NBA clients are they're 7, they're 7 to 10, 5 in some cases. It's crazy, man. The world of college basketball has certainly changed.
Yeah, it is completely different from everything else. Mike, I guess I should ask you, since we haven't had you on in a while, Indiana racking up, Michigan racking up some guys. Any thoughts on the rest of the Big Ten and what they brought in here?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about unrecognizable. That's going to be the Big Ten.
I need a roster guide. I really do, Mike, just to figure out who's on who.
Yeah, no, I think it's when you look at those teams, the Indianas, the Michigans, I'm not sure I see a real plan other than get dudes.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can work out for you. Sometimes, like I said, with those transfer portal rankings, it's not always a great indicator for the following season, right? There isn't that. It's not just, hey, we're shooing now to get to the next weekend. But I do think Indiana's done some nice things. Obviously, one of Illinois' own has made his way over there, and Luke Goody, and and then you look at Miles Rice, you look at Carlisle as well, that they picked up from Stanford. Galloway's coming back. Ballo, I think it's fascinating, right? Because I just think about this for Luke Goody for a second. Okay.
Yep.
You go to a place where, the benefit of playing at Illinois was that Coleman Hawkins was going to play the 5, and you had basically 4 wing positions to fill in, which gave Luke Goody more opportunity to play. Now you go to an Indiana where I got to think Malik Renew and Ballo are going to play together at the 4 and 5. And I got to think that Mbako is also going to play. So you look and you're just like, and this is.
I get the family pull to it.
100%.
I'm sure the NIL is going to be very good for Luke Goody compared to what it was at Illinois. But minutes in the role, I agree. He's going to have to guard threes, right? That could be an issue for him. And is he going to have as much space to operate? That's
and look, there's, to me, and this is just my personal opinion on the matter, understanding who you are as a player. And this isn't a Luke Goody thing. This is just overall, right? Because I think this is important for every transfer and everyone that comes in. It's like, hey, you know what? When I go from school to school, a lot of times it's like, oh man, I can go there and do this and do that I wasn't able to do at this place. And what I think kids lose sight of is sometimes less is more with certain guys. I knew for me as a player, when I went to Wright State, for example, I was like, you know what? If I'm doing stuff off the dribble and coming off a million ball screens, I don't know how much I'm going to play because I may turn it over more than I usually would. But my worth to this team, I was catch and shoot threes, catch and shoot threes, catch and shoot threes. Don't turn the ball over, make good reads, make good passes. And then you increase your value, right? There's less reasons to take you off the floor. Your minutes increase. And I think for a lot of guys, there's just this sense of I got to go do more, or I got to go do this at this next place. And then you see as a player, there's diminishing returns there. If that's not necessarily, your most efficient way to play, because your most efficient way to play is what's going to keep you on the floor. So yeah, I mean, look across the board, even look at Michigan. How are they going to maneuver that front court? Are they going to play Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden together? And where does Sam Walter fit into that? And oh my God, Roddy Gale just went to Michigan from Ohio State. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Trey Donaldson too. And now they got the kid from North Texas as well. Like there's a lot that they have to figure out, because there's a lot of guys that I think are really similar on both those teams, on both Indiana and Michigan. Whereas for Illinois, and that's not to say that Illinois is going to finish above them in the Big Ten or win the Big Ten. Like a lot has to play out, and how all these pieces mesh together is huge. But man, I at least like there at least looks like there's a plan for some of these schools.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a vision other than just get all the talent in the world, right? They could have gotten some guys who were just, hey, here's a really talented guy. They went and got prioritized Ben Humrichous. They went and prioritized Kerry Booth. Like there's reasons behind why they had Trey White, I would say even. So yeah, it makes sense, the pieces they're putting together. We just don't have the complete picture, which is why leading into today, everyone was fretting. And earlier today is, you see these guys enter the transfer portal. You're not hearing anything the last couple of weeks, but you put these pieces together. You add a big, like we were talking about. You add a wing that can be a double-digit scorer, put pressure on the rim. I think that was the best way to say, is they need a guy who can do that. You get those two things. Like all of these things are cohesive on this roster.
Well, and think about it from Illini fans' perspective. It's FOMO. Is what it is. Yep. Like you had a layoff in between commitments. Indiana got a few. Michigan got a few. There were a number of teams that picked up different commitments.
If only Brad would have spread out the early ones. He had 4 in like 4 days, and you got the number 1 transfer class, and then you have like 2 weeks off. So yeah, I mean they're
you know what's interesting to me, just from an NIL perspective. I want to get to the point where, and this is just from it would almost be like a radio type talking segments.
Yeah.
NIL pools being public. How much NIL do you have, and how much did you pay X player? Because I think a really important conversation to have.
Well, if they're employees, Mike, that would be public information,
right? Is what percentage of the pool is this player? Right. That's like the way that I think some of these teams, the smart teams, are thinking about it that way. And I think that's like a whole different conversation when we talk about commitments for these teams, is like, hey, a Ben Humrichous for $1.1 million when you have 2.2.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's different than Ben Humrichous for $200K when you have 10% of the cap as opposed to 50%, or like all that. I think is interesting, because I think it shows, like, for all these coaches now, what's happened is like, whether it's like Humrichous or, Ballo goes to Indiana, or all these guys, it's like the first thought is NIL, or the first thought is like, well, this guy went here because the NIL is good. It's no longer what I think it should be, especially in Humrichous' case. Like, hey, really like the staff. Hey, really like the opportunity that he had here, or that he's going to have here. Like those conversations get thrown out the door. So it's like, for these coaches, it's like, all right, well, now can we at least see how savvy they are with how they're maneuvering that pool of NIL, and how they're using these players, and how they're filling in. It's just like the NBA. It's like, okay, I like this player, but do I like him on a 5-year, $210 million contract? I don't know.
Well, and I was bringing it up with Piper earlier today. Like the NBA, there's a salary cap. NFL, there's a salary cap. This feels more like Major League Baseball. And sometimes the teams with the most money aren't as smart with the money.
Yeah.
While you have teams like, I'm not saying the Mets are terrible with it. Even the Yankees sometimes can get overspended, but they're better at it. The Dodgers are phenomenal at spending their own money, even though they do that at the highest, like they got the highest tier. But I know this doesn't work now because they're struggling, but the Cardinals for years were so good at this. The Rays now are so good at this, of spending their money and allocating their resources. That's how we got to think about college basketball now. As crazy as it is, these cap kind of conversations are true. Nobody was a better return of an investment in college basketball last year than Marcus Domask. Like that is a bigger addition, both on the floor and with the size of the cap, than any in the transfer portal last year. So Hunter Dickinson was a more productive player at the end of the day with his stats, but he was really expensive. So like Marcus was a better return on investment.
Hunter Dickinson was like 20x, right? Like 15x, whatever it was. But like you look at a guy like Marcus Domask, that him specific, like I don't want to say solely, but he had a big hand in changing the mid-major market. I really believe that. And so, now you look and you see mid-major players that, there's a lot of like the numbers that are being thrown around. It's like there's high major guys that are almost more of a bargain now as opposed to mid-major guys, because it's almost flipped the whole other way. So yeah, it's or you see some of these players that are coming into the portal and it's like they come in, or like a high major player. This is what just kind of makes me laugh. Like when you hear these things, it's like, hey, high major player comes in to the portal with X number and, oh, everyone likes me. Did I say X? I meant 3X. Yeah. It's just like, it's wild, man. It is like the complete.
It's a good time.
And like, because they're being paid like this and because they're being really treated like professional athletes, that's why I'm like, hey, I want to know the numbers. I want to know how much of the cap they're eating into, because that'll tell me how efficiently you're spending this money in the offseason. And I think that's like a real conversation to have.
It's going to be fun. Funny in like 5 years, we could talk about that. Who's the best spender? Who's the smartest spender?
That's what you want to know, right? I mean, I think if, and maybe collectives and donors, like they know that, depending on like, knowing the exact total and how that person pans out. Because what I thought back when Nigel Pack was the first like public deal, where it was 2 years, 800,000. Honest to God, I was like, great for Nigel, because this is the peak, and it has gone the other way somehow. It's just it's wild, man. It's insane.
Yeah. It is crazy. Well, Mike LaTulip, we will do a film room on Ben Humrichous later this week. I appreciate you. Short notice, but I felt like I couldn't leave the pod as one of like, is it time for concern? Well, now they add Ben Humrichous. So appreciate you joining us here later at night, man. We'll catch up with you soon.
Appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks to everybody for watching the Illini Inquirer podcast live on the YouTube. More than 400 of you. We appreciate you. And if you're on, listen to us on the podcast, give us a follow, rating, review, wherever your podcast. Derek Piper, busy at work with his breakdown of this commitment. We'll have more at IlliniInquirer.com. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.